I'm 78 years old now, and I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I found out the man I'd loved, trusted, and shared a bed with for 50 long years wasn't who he said he was. My name is Margaret Hill, though most people in my town just call me Grandma Maggie. I lived in a small white house on the edge of Willow Creek, a peaceful little place where everybody knows everybody. For most of my life, I was proud of the same thing every woman my age was proud of: my marriage. My husband, Robert Hill, was the kind of man people admired, a quiet, gentle soul. He fixed things around the neighborhood, told great stories, and never raised his voice. For half a century, we celebrated anniversaries, raised 2 children, and even welcomed grandchildren into the world. 50 years of laughter, love, and growing old together. Or so I thought, because one morning, after he passed away, a knock on my door shattered everything I believed about my life. The man I buried wasn't Robert Hill. Not legally, not truly. Not even close. The stranger who came to my door that day handed me an envelope that changed everything. And from that moment, my life stopped being the quiet story of an old woman and became a mystery I didn't know I was living in for 50 years. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet, cold, and gray, the kind of morning where you can almost hear the clock ticking louder than usual. Robert had been gone for 6 months. I still couldn't bring myself to move his slippers from beside the bed. Every day felt the same. Tea, silence, memories. I was folding laundry when I heard a knock at the door. 3 slow, firm knocks. I thought it might be the mailman or maybe the neighbor boy returning my rake again. When I opened the door, a man in his 40s stood there, tall, sharp suit, dark hair slicked back. He held a brown envelope and a badge. "Mrs. Hill?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice unsure. "I'm Agent Walker, FBI," he said, showing me his badge for a brief moment. "I need to talk to you about your late husband." For a second, I thought I misheard. "The FBI?" I asked, forcing a little laugh. "You must have the wrong Hill. My Robert was a mechanic, not whatever this is about." The man's eyes softened. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we have reason to believe your husband's real name wasn't Robert Hill." I froze. I wanted to tell him he was crazy, that my husband had lived in this town for 50 years, that everyone knew him. But my throat went dry. He handed me the envelope. "You might want to sit down before opening this." I remember my hands trembling as I tore it open. Inside were a few black and white photographs and a single birth certificate. The name on the document wasn't Robert Hill. It said Samuel Reeves. I looked at the photos, old military images, a younger version of Robert, or Samuel, in a uniform, standing beside men I'd never seen before. I felt dizzy. Agent Walker sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had eaten breakfast together every morning for 50 years. He spoke slowly, watching my reaction. "Ma'am, your husband Samuel Reeves went missing in 1971. He was wanted for questioning in a bank robbery that left 1 person injured. After that, he disappeared completely. Until we matched fingerprints after his passing." My heart started pounding. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "That the man you married was living under a false identity." I remember the sound of the clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, the way my fingers dug into the tablecloth. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared at the photos like they were part of someone else's nightmare. I met him in 1974, I said quietly. In Ohio. He told me he'd just left the army. He said his family was all gone. Agent Walker nodded. That fits his timeline. He reinvented himself right around that time. He handed me a card and said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hill. I'll need to come back soon to ask a few more questions." Then he left. When the door closed, I sat there for almost an hour, staring at those pictures. The man I loved, the man who fixed our roof and read bedtime stories to our children, had lied to me from the very beginning. I walked into the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His scent was still there, old cologne and cedar. I ran my fingers along the inside pocket of his jacket and felt something stiff. An envelope. It was sealed and yellowed with age, my Name written in his handwriting. For Maggie, if I'm ever gone. My heart skipped. I sat on the bed, afraid to open it. For 50 years, I thought I knew this man better than anyone. Now I wasn't sure I knew him at all. When I finally opened the letter, my hands were shaking so badly that I almost tore it. It said, Maggie, if you're reading this, then I couldn't keep my past hidden any longer. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I couldn't risk losing you. There are things about my life that I've buried deep, things I'm not proud of. Please don't hate me. Just know that every day with you was real. No explanation, no names, just guilt and love on the same page. I pressed the letter to my chest and started crying. Not because he lied, but because I realized I'd probably never know why. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice in my head, laughing, telling old stories, promising me we'd grow old together. And suddenly, I didn't know which stories were real anymore. I thought about calling my daughter, but what would I even say? Your father was someone else? It sounded insane. So I sat there, alone in the dark, staring at his photo on the wall, the one taken on our 25th anniversary, and whispered, Who were you, Robert? I didn't know that the next morning, I'd find something that would make the mystery even deeper, something hidden in our basement that would change everything I thought I knew about him. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. Birds sang outside my window. The mail truck rumbled down the street, but everything felt off. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like his, and suddenly I didn't even know who he really was. I kept replaying that letter in my head. There are things I've buried deep. Those words stuck with me, buried deep. And in 50 years of living in that house, there was only one place that had always given me a strange feeling: the basement. Robert had always been protective of that space. He said it was his tool area, and he didn't like anyone touching his workbench. I respected that. For decades, I never questioned it. But that morning, something inside me told me to go down there. The basement door creaked open like it hadn't been used in years, though I knew he'd been there every week. The air smelled of dust and oil. I turned on the light, the same flickering bulb he always promised to replace. The concrete floor was cold under my slippers. His workbench was still neat. His tools hung perfectly on the wall: wrenches, hammers, screwdrivers. But behind the bench, the wall looked odd, like someone had patched it years ago. I leaned closer. The paint shade was just slightly different, a lighter gray. That was when I noticed a faint outline, almost like a square, about the size of a small door. My heart started pounding again. I pulled the workbench aside, and dust filled the air. My hands shook as I traced the outline. It was real. A hidden door. For a moment, I just stood there. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was behind it, but curiosity and fear danced together in my chest. I took a screwdriver and pried at the edge until it loosened. The wood creaked, then popped open. Inside was a small space, barely big enough to stand in. And in that hidden nook, there was an old metal box, a suitcase, and a stack of yellowed newspapers. I pulled the box out first. It was heavy, and there was a lock, the kind Robert used on his fishing gear. But the key wasn't far. It was taped underneath the workbench drawer, typical of him to hide it in plain sight. When I unlocked the box, I gasped. Inside were bundles of cash, hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, all old bills from the 1970s. And beneath the money were several IDs. Not just one name, 5. Different photos, but all him. Each with a different name. Samuel Reeves, Richard Lane, George Howard. Every name felt like a stranger. I felt sick. Who had I been sleeping beside for 50 years? The suitcase was next. Inside were military patches, some medals, and an old revolver wrapped in cloth. And a photograph. It was him again, younger, maybe in his 20s, standing with 3 men in suits beside a car. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "The team, 69, before everything went wrong." Before everything went wrong. The air felt colder now. I heard the floor above me creak, my imagination, or maybe just the house settling. But I suddenly felt like I wasn't supposed to be down there, like I was trespassing in my own life. I gathered everything, locked the box, and carried it upstairs. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped it on the stairs. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where Agent Walker had sat yesterday, and laid everything out in front of me. The IDs, the money, the gun. And then something strange caught my eye. One of the IDs had an address printed on it. Richard Lane, 218 North Elm Street, Columbus. That was the city where we first met. He used to tell me stories about a little diner there, how he'd stop every morning for coffee before work. Now I wasn't sure if those stories were even his, but something deep inside me whispered, "Go there, Maggie." Find out the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every memory of Robert felt like a lie replaying in my head. I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, and suddenly I remembered something. A woman who had once come to our door, years ago, maybe 15 years back. She had asked for Robert, said she was looking for a Sam. He told me she had the wrong address, then closed the door quickly. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now that memory made my stomach twist. The next morning, I packed a small bag, some clothes, my wallet, and that metal box. I told my daughter I was going to visit an old friend for a few days. But I wasn't visiting anyone. I was going to Columbus, to the address on that ID, to find out who my husband really was. As I locked the door, I glanced at his photo one last time. That warm smile, those kind eyes, and I whispered, "If you loved me, Robert, or Samuel, or whoever you are, please let the truth be something I can live with." Then I walked out of the house, not as a widow, but as a detective of my own life. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I reached Columbus, someone would be waiting for me, someone who knew my husband long before I did. And what that man would tell me would make my whole body go cold. The drive to Columbus took 4 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. I kept my eyes on the road, though my mind was a storm of memories. Our wedding day, his laughter, the way he used to hum when he fixed the sink. Every single image of Robert, or Samuel, or whoever he really was, played in my head like scenes from a movie I no longer trusted. When I finally reached 218 North Elm Street, I expected to see an apartment building or maybe an office. Instead, it was a small, boarded-up diner, Marcy's Cafe, its windows dusty, the sign half fallen. I parked my car and stepped out, holding my coat tight. The wind bit through me. A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the yard. But something about that place tugged at my heart. The faded red door, the smell of old coffee lingering in the air even after all these years. I walked around to the back and found a man sitting on the steps, gray beard, weathered face, cigarette between his fingers. He looked up as I approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I hesitated. "I'm looking for someone who used to live here. A man named Richard Lane." The man squinted. "Richard Lane? Haven't heard that name in years." He stood slowly, his back a little bent. "I used to own this place. Name's Eddie. I knew Richard pretty well. If you mean the same guy I think you do." My heart thudded. "Tall man, dark hair, quiet voice?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's him. Always paid in cash. Kept to himself." "Why do you ask?" I swallowed. "He was my husband," Eddie froze. The cigarette slipped from his fingers and hit the ground. "Your husband?" I nodded. He looked at me for a long time, then motioned toward the steps. "Sit down, ma'am. You'd better hear this." I sat beside him, my hands clasped so tight they hurt. Eddie took a deep breath. "Richard, or Sam, whatever his name really was, came here around 1972. Said he'd just left the service. I hired him to help out around the cafe. He was good, polite, quiet, but there was something off about him." "Off?" I asked. He never talked about his past. Never mentioned family. One night, some men came asking for him, said they were from the government, but they didn't have badges. When I told Richard the next morning, he packed his bag and disappeared that same night. Never said goodbye. I felt my stomach drop. He told me he moved to Ohio that same year. That's where we met. He said his parents had died, that he was starting fresh. Eddie gave me a long, sad look. "Sounds like he was, but not for the reasons you thought." We sat in silence for a moment. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells in the distance. Eddie leaned closer. "You said he was your husband. How long?" 50 years, I whispered. He whistled softly. He must have loved you to stay gone that long. I frowned. What do you mean? Eddie sighed. He told me once that he did something he could never undo. Said there was a man, his best friend, who got hurt because of him. He said if anyone ever found out, he'd lose everything. The words hit me like ice water. He never mentioned that. He said he left the army because of an injury. Eddie shook his head. Maybe that's what he wanted you to believe. But I'll tell you one thing. The man I knew carried guilt heavier than any wound. He used to sit right there drinking black coffee, mumbling to himself about one mistake that ruined his life. I felt tears sting my eyes. Did he ever mention a name? Someone he worked with? Eddie thought for a moment. Yeah, once. He mentioned a guy named Cal. Said Cal knew too much and that if Cal ever showed up again, he'd be in trouble. The name meant nothing to me. Not yet. But I wrote it down anyway. Eddie looked at me again, his eyes softening. You know, ma'am, he used to carry this little photo in his wallet. 2 kids and a woman. Said they were his dream family. I guess that was you. My breath caught. You saw our photo? Yeah. He'd take it out sometimes, smile, then put it away quick, like it hurt to look at it. I felt my throat tighten. He did love me. Even with all the lies, part of him was real. As I stood to leave, Eddie stopped me. Wait, there's something else. He walked inside the cafe and came back with an old envelope. Found this behind the counter when I cleaned out the place. Figured it belonged to him. Never knew where to send it. I took it carefully. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a faded photograph. Robert or Samuel, standing with another man. On the back was written, "To Cal, brothers till the end." And below it, a phone number. I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked at Eddie. Thank you, I whispered. You've helped more than you know, he nodded. If he hurt you, I'm sorry. But from what I saw, he was running from his past, not from love. I drove away from Columbus with tears in my eyes, the photo beside me on the seat. The number on the back haunted me. Who was Cal? And if Robert had spent 50 years hiding from him, what would happen if I called? That night, back in my hotel room, I sat on the bed staring at the phone. My fingers hovered over the number. Finally, I whispered to myself, if I've come this far, I need to know the rest. And I dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, deep, gravelly, older. Who's this? I swallowed hard. My name is Margaret Hill. I think you knew my husband. His name was Samuel Reeves. Silence. Then the man said quietly, Ma'am, if you're calling about Sam, we need to meet. There's something you don't know. And it might not be safe to talk on the phone. The man on the phone, Cal, told me to meet him the next afternoon at a diner off Highway 60 just outside Columbus. His voice was cautious, rough, like a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's, or Samuel's, face smiling at me, and then vanishing behind smoke and secrets. When I arrived, the place looked almost empty. It was an old roadside diner with peeling red paint and the smell of burnt coffee. I sat at a corner booth, my heart pounding. A few minutes later, an older man walked in, maybe in his 70s, wearing a faded leather jacket. He scanned the room, saw me, and nodded. Even before he spoke, I knew it was him. Margaret Hill? He asked, sliding into the booth across from me. Yes, I said softly. You're Cal? He nodded, his eyes sharp and searching. I haven't heard that name in a long time, he said. You said your husband was Samuel Reeves? I nodded again. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. Well, I guess the past finally caught up to us. There was a heavy silence before I spoke. I need to know the truth. I've been married to that man for 50 years. The FBI came to my house. They said he wasn't who he claimed to be. Please, I just want to understand. Cal looked down at his coffee, swirling it slowly. You deserve to know, but it's not an easy story. I'm not leaving until I hear it, I said, my voice shaking but firm. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Cal's story began in 1969. He and Samuel Reeves had joined the same military unit during the Vietnam War. They became best friends. Brothers, really. After coming home, they both struggled to adjust to civilian life. Sam was brilliant, Cal said. He could fix anything, talk his way out of anything. But he got mixed up with the wrong people after the war. Desperate. Lost guys who thought they could make fast money. I listened silently, my stomach twisting tighter with every word. One night, Cal continued, one of those guys, a man named Vince, planned a bank heist. Sam was supposed to be the getaway driver. He didn't want to do it, but they threatened him. Said if he didn't help, they'd turn him in for something worse, something from the war. He paused, looking at me carefully. Do you know what happened that night? I shook my head. The plan went bad. The alarm went off early. One of the guards got shot, not by Sam, but by Vince. The group scattered. Sam panicked. He took the money, not for himself. He said he wanted to destroy the evidence, to end it. But when the police showed up, his fingerprints were everywhere. They thought he was the shooter. My hands trembled. So he ran? Cal nodded. He came to me that night, covered in mud and shaking. Said he couldn't live with what happened. I told him to turn himself in, but he was terrified. Said no one would believe him. He sighed, his eyes heavy with years of regret. The next morning, he was gone. Took a fake ID, some cash, and vanished. I never saw him again. I felt tears fill my eyes. He told me he left the army because of an injury, I whispered. Cal gave a sad smile. He probably wished that was true. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. I kept this all these years. It's a letter he wrote me the night before he disappeared. I hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was the same, my husband's looping cursive. Cal, I know you'll hate me for running, but I can't face prison for something I didn't do. I'm leaving everything behind. My name, my life, my soul. Maybe one day, I'll build a new life and finally do something good with it. My hands shook as I finished reading. He'd built that new life. With me. Why didn't you ever turn this in? I asked softly. Cal stared at the window. Because I knew he wasn't a killer, and part of me hoped he'd finally find peace. He looked back at me, eyes red now. Did he? I swallowed hard. I think he did for a while, but he carried that secret to his grave. We sat in silence. The sound of the diner's old ceiling fan filled the air. After a while, Cal leaned forward. There's something you should know, Maggie. The guard who got shot that night, he didn't die. He recovered. The police dropped the case years later when the real shooter confessed. My breath caught. You mean, my husband could have come home? He nodded slowly. Yeah, but he didn't know that. He stayed gone out of guilt. Tears streamed down my face before I even realized I was crying. He lived 50 years in fear. For nothing, I whispered. Cal's eyes softened. He wasn't a bad man, Margaret. Just a broken one. He took a sip of his cold coffee, then reached into his jacket again. One more thing, he said. He left something else with me, just in case someone ever came looking. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was a gold locket, my initials engraved on the back. I gasped. I lost this 30 years ago, I said. Cal smiled faintly. He had me fix the clasp. Said it was the only thing he'd ever stolen that was worth keeping. I closed my hand around it and cried quietly. When I finally looked up, Cal said, You know, he used to talk about you. He said you made him feel like a real man again. Like he wasn't running anymore. That broke me. After all the lies, the hiding, the half-truths, I realized his love had been the only thing real about him. When I left the diner, Cal stood by the window and watched me go. I turned back once and saw him raise a hand in goodbye. Driving home, the road blurred through my tears. I had the answers I wanted, but they didn't heal me. If anything, they left me with a new kind of ache, the kind that comes when you finally understand, too late. Still, something in me whispered that my journey wasn't over. Because when I got home that night, there was a new envelope waiting in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single line, typed neatly on white paper. You're not the only one looking for the truth, Mrs. Hill. When I got home that night, I felt lighter and heavier all at once. I had answers, yes, but not peace. The envelope in my mailbox had no return address, no stamp, just a plain sheet of white paper inside. You're not the only one looking for the truth, Mrs. Hill. My heart dropped. For a long time, I stood frozen on the porch, the night air pressing against my skin. How could anyone know what I'd just learned? The only person who knew was Cal, and he wouldn't have written this. He didn't even know my address. I went inside, locked the door, and sat in the dark living room. The old grandfather clock ticked softly, each sound echoing through the quiet house like a heartbeat. After a while, I told myself it was nothing. Probably a prank. Maybe one of those scam letters. But the next morning, I noticed something strange. The small wooden box where I kept Robert's, or Samuel's, old watch was slightly open. I always closed it tightly. I checked everything else. Nothing was missing. But there, under the box, was another note. This one handwritten. Some stories aren't meant to be told. That's when I realized someone had been inside my house. I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. Probably just kids messing around, the officer said. But kids don't break into houses without stealing anything. And they don't leave warnings about 50-year-old secrets. For days, I didn't sleep well. Every time the floor creaked, my body stiffened. Every knock, every gust of wind felt like someone watching. I even called Cal again, desperate for answers. Cal, has anyone contacted you since we met? He paused. No, why? I told him about the notes. There was silence on the other end. Then he said quietly, Don't talk about this to anyone else, Margaret. Not yet. What do you mean? I think someone's still cleaning up after the past. Sam wasn't the only one who ran that night. That sentence made my stomach twist. Are you saying someone else is still alive? I asked. Alive, he said, and probably worried you're getting too close. He told me to stay put and promised to drive down in a few days. But he never made it. 3 days later, I saw it on the local news. Elderly man found dead in his truck off Highway 60, believed to be natural causes. It was Cal. My hands went cold. They said heart attack. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. He had been fine when I saw him, sharp, healthy, determined, and then suddenly, gone. The night after his death, I sat alone at my kitchen table, clutching the locket he'd given me. That's when the phone rang again. Mrs. Hill? A deep voice said. You need to stop. Who is this? I demanded. You think you want the truth. You don't. Your husband ran for a reason. Who are you? Click. The line went dead. After that, I started noticing things. A black sedan parked across the street 2 nights in a row. A man pretending to read a newspaper near my mailbox. Footsteps on the gravel driveway late at night. Soft, measured, deliberate. I wasn't crazy. I knew someone was watching me, and then came the package. No name, no sender. Just a small brown parcel wrapped in old newspaper. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, a picture of Robert, younger, standing beside 3 men I didn't recognize. One of them had a gun tucked in his belt. On the back of the photo were the words, "He wasn't just running from something. He was running with something." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. Running with something? What could that mean? That night, I tore through the attic, searching for anything he'd hidden. I opened boxes, lifted floorboards, checked every drawer, every book. And then, behind a false panel in the old wardrobe, I found it, a metal tin box, rusted at the edges, sealed with tape. Inside were stacks of letters, documents, and one faded envelope marked, "To be opened only if I never return." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was another note, written in his familiar handwriting. Maggie, if you're reading this, it means the past has finally found me. I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't put you in danger. What I did after the war wasn't about greed. It was about justice. The men I ran with stole from men who stole from everyone else. We didn't get away clean. We tried to fix what was broken, but someone didn't want that. At the bottom, one sentence was underlined twice. If they ever come for you, go to the cabin. The cabin. Our old lake cabin. The one we hadn't visited in over 20 years. I suddenly remembered he'd refused to sell it. No matter how much I asked, that's when everything clicked. Whatever he'd hidden, whatever he'd been running from, it was there. The next morning, before sunrise, I packed a small bag, tucked the letters into my purse, and drove toward the lake. The road was long and quiet, lined with fog and pine trees. Halfway there, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart froze. A black sedan followed, headlights off. I gripped the wheel, breathing hard. The road ahead split. One path led to the cabin, the other toward town. I slowed, pretending to pull off for gas. The sedan slowed too. It wasn't my imagination anymore. Someone really didn't want me finding whatever was in that cabin. I pressed the gas and took the back road, the one only Robert and I used to use. By the time I reached the lake, the sun was rising, and the sedan was gone. I parked near the dock, heart pounding, and stared at the old wooden cabin. Dusty windows, sagging roof. Still, it stood, like a ghost from my past. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. There, on the dusty table, sat a single envelope, yellowed with age, my name written neatly on the front. For Margaret. From Robert. The cabin hadn't changed much since the last time I saw it. The same cracked windows. The same porch swing swaying in the wind. It smelled like dust, pine, and memories. I stood there, staring at the envelope on the table, my name written in Robert's familiar, careful handwriting. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper was yellowed and soft, the ink faded. For a long time, I just held it against my chest, afraid to open it, afraid of what 50 years of truth might do to me. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in the same looping script I'd seen in every birthday card and love note he'd ever given me. I sat down, took a deep breath, and began to read. My dearest Maggie, if you found this, it means the past has caught up to me, just like I always feared. I don't know how much you know, but I owe you the truth. The truth I should have told you the day we met. My real name is Samuel Reeves. In 1969, I was part of something that started as a mission for good and turned into a nightmare. The men I ran with weren't criminals at first. We were soldiers, angry, forgotten, and desperate to make things right after what we'd seen overseas. When we came home, we discovered that money meant to rebuild towns and help veterans was being stolen by corrupt contractors and officials. We wanted to expose them, but the only evidence we had was inside a private bank account, millions of dollars hidden in illegal funds. One of us, Vince, decided to take matters into his own hands. He planned to rob the bank, take the evidence, and turn it over to the press. But that night went wrong. Shots were fired. A guard went down. I wasn't the shooter, but my fingerprints were on everything. I took the evidence, not the money, and ran. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the police. That's when I changed my name to Robert Hill. I felt my throat tighten. He hadn't just been running from a crime. He'd been running to protect proof of one. I kept reading. I met you a year later in a diner just outside Denver. You smiled at me like you'd known me your whole life. For the first time in years, I felt human again. I wanted to tell you everything, but every time I tried, I saw the fear in your eyes when I talked about the past, and I couldn't bear to lose you. The truth? Maggie, is that the evidence, the documents, the names, the accounts, are hidden right here, in this cabin, beneath the floorboards under the table where I left this letter. I never touched them again because I didn't want you involved. But if someone comes looking, it means that money, and the people it could destroy, still matter to someone. If you ever find this, promise me one thing. Don't go to the police. They can't help. Find a man named Agent Thomas Keene. He was one of the few I trusted. If he's still alive, he'll know what to do. You gave me 50 years of peace, Maggie. I never deserved that kind of love. And if I could live it all again, even with the lies, I would. Because every morning I woke up beside you was the only truth that ever mattered. Forgive me. Robert, Samuel. When I finished reading, my tears had already soaked through the paper. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the floorboards beneath the table. Finally, I pushed the table aside and knelt down. The boards were dusty but loose. With trembling hands, I pried one up, and there it was, a metal box sealed shut with rusted clasps. I dragged it out, coughing from the dust. Inside were files, photos, and microfilm rolls, things I barely recognized, names, signatures, transaction records, hundreds of them, and all of them linked to powerful men, businessmen, politicians, even military officials, stealing millions meant for wounded soldiers and devastated families. He had kept evidence. Evidence that could ruin lives, even now. I felt the weight of the box like it was alive, like it had been waiting 50 years to breathe again. Just then, I heard the crunch of tires outside. My heart stopped. I peered through the curtain. A black sedan had pulled up near the porch. The same one I'd seen before. I grabbed the box, heart pounding, and ran to the back room. The front door creaked open. Footsteps, heavy, slow. A man's voice called out, "Mrs. Hill? We just want to talk." I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the box. The voice came closer. "We know what you found. You're in over your head, ma'am. Hand over the materials and nobody gets hurt." That's when I saw something glint through the window. A badge. Not a gun. A badge. The man stepped into view. Late 50s, gray hair, calm eyes. "Agent Keene," he said quietly. "I worked with your husband a long time ago." I froze. "You're real?" He nodded. "He trusted me to protect you. And now it's time to finish what he started." He looked around the cabin, saw the open floorboards, and sighed. "He really did keep it all, didn't he?" I nodded. "He told me to find you." He gave a small smile. Sad, almost fatherly. "He was a good man, Mrs. Hill. The kind that never stopped trying to do the right thing, even when the world punished him for it." Then his expression hardened. "But there are still people who'd rather this truth stay buried." "We need to move now." I hesitated. "What about the men outside?" He turned toward the window. "They're not with me." And before I could say another word, a gunshot shattered the front window. Agent Keene shoved me to the ground, shouting, "Stay down!" Glass rained across the room. The echoes of footsteps thundered on the porch. I clutched the box to my chest as another shot rang out. Then, silence. When I looked up, Keene was gone. The door hung open. The sedan outside, empty. Only the wind moved now, whispering through the trees, and on the floor, beside the broken window, lay a small black USB drive, something I hadn't seen fall before. Written on it in tiny white letters were the words, "The truth, keep safe." The cabin was silent again. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mixing with the damp wood and the scent of rain. I sat there on the floor, clutching the black USB drive that had appeared from nowhere. The truth, keep safe. It felt heavier than it should have, as if the weight of my husband's entire life and lie was sealed inside. Outside, the forest was still. No more cars, no more footsteps, just wind carrying whispers I couldn't understand. Agent Keene was gone, vanished, just like Robert had half a century ago. For hours, I sat there in the quiet, staring at the broken window, trying to decide what to do. I was old, tired, and scared, but more than that, I was angry. Angry at the people who'd stolen from the innocent. Angry at the men who had turned my husband into a ghost. And angry at myself for loving someone I never really knew. But then again, maybe I did know him. Maybe I was the only one who ever truly did. By nightfall, I'd made up my mind. I drove home with the USB and the metal box hidden under a blanket in the trunk. Once there, I turned on my old computer, a slow, wheezing thing that barely worked anymore, and plugged in the drive. The screen flickered, and a single folder appeared, Reeves' Evidence. I clicked it open, and there it was, hundreds of scanned documents, photos, names, and bank transfers. And at the top, one final video file labeled, "For Maggie." My breath caught. I clicked play. The screen showed Robert, older, frailer, maybe recorded only a few months before his death. He sat in his favorite armchair, the one by the fireplace. He smiled that soft, tired smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "Maggie, if you're watching this, I guess my past finally caught up to me. I've carried this for too long. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just hiding from myself. I spent 50 years pretending to be a man I wasn't. But the truth is, the man you loved, the man who built that life with you, that was me too. The name was fake, but the love wasn't. You were my peace, Maggie. You made me believe that maybe God hadn't given up on me yet. I wish I could have been brave enough to tell you everything. I wish you'd never have to learn it this way. If you find this, you'll have a choice to make. You can bury it all again, and no one will ever know. Or you can tell the world. But if you do, know this. The men behind it all, some are still alive. And they'll come for you, just like they came for me. Do what your heart tells you. I trust you more than I ever trusted myself. I love you. Always have. Always will." The video ended. For a long time, I couldn't move. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hall, the same rhythm that had marked our 50 years together. He was gone. But in that moment, it felt like he was right there with me again. The next morning, I drove to the post office with a small package in my hands, the USB drive and a letter. The letter was addressed to the Washington Chronicle, one of the biggest newspapers in the country. Inside, I wrote, "This is the story of a man named Samuel Reeves and the truth he died protecting. Make sure it's told right." I sealed it, handed it over the counter, and watched the clerk drop it into the outgoing bin. Then I walked out into the sunlight, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: peace. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson. I thought of Robert, of the years we shared, the laughter, the quiet dinners, the mornings he kissed my forehead before work. All of it had been real. The lies had built our life, but love had made it worth living. A soft breeze brushed across my face, and for just a moment, I swore I could smell his cologne. Faint, familiar. I smiled. "I forgave you a long time ago," I whispered. I just didn't know it yet. The next morning, the story broke. 50-year-old corruption scandal exposed after anonymous tip. Millions recovered. Families finally get justice. The names, the money, the proof, all out in the open. My phone rang nonstop that day. Reporters, officials, even old friends asking if it was true. I didn't answer. Some stories don't need to be told twice. A week later, I visited Robert's grave. The headstone still read, "Robert Hill." I placed a single white lily beside it and smiled softly. "I guess the world finally knows who you were," I said. "But I'll always remember who you became." The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, low and steady, like a man laughing softly. I turned to leave, my heart strangely light. And as I walked back toward the car, I whispered to myself, 50 years of lies, a lifetime of love, and in the end, the truth set us both free. And that was the story of how I spent 50 years with a man who wasn't who he said he was, and how love, even built on lies, can still lead to truth. If you've made it this far, take a moment to think about the people you trust, the stories you've been told, and the secrets you'll never know. Sometimes, the people who hide the most aren't trying to deceive us. They're trying to protect us. And sometimes, forgiveness is the only truth that matters. This was Story Hunt, where real emotions and hidden truths come to life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because somewhere out there, another grandma might be waiting to tell her story too. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep hunting for the stories that matter.